Judaism, the way of exile and return, or perhaps even the way of exile and repair. Though today not considered to be a proselytizing religion, and in spite of the significant history of persecution, including the Holocaust in which 6 million Jews were murdered systematically, Judaism has spread throughout the world. Of the roughly 7 billion people in the world, about 2%, or 14 million, identify as Jewish. Of these, about 2 million claim this identity in ethnicity alone. As we begin our short historical introduction, there are 2 points I want to make up front. Number 1, no religion develops in a vacuum, apart from the influence of other traditions, and apart from the social and historical realities on the ground. Number 2, no religion comes pre-assembled. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. They each participate in a historical and theological, philosophical evolution that is never ending, but that is often, the evidence for its evolution is often deliberately covered up by and through each tradition's narrative. I think we'll see that as we move forward. Judaism originated in the Middle East over 3,500 years ago. Following the biblical narrative, Jews trace their start of their tradition back to Abraham, the first follower of Yahweh, to settle in a place called Canaan, now modern-day Israel, around 1750 or so. Now, I won't be exhaustive with the Hebrew Bible's accounting of all that follows from after Abraham's settlement, but the definitive narrative tells us that the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are gifted the land of Canaan by their God, El Shaddai. A famine sends them to Egypt, where they eventually become slaves and languish in captivity for 400 years until Yahweh liberates them under the leadership of Moses. After some 40 years of wandering, now under Joshua's leadership, Yahweh permits them to enter and take Canaan by force. Before I sort of unpack a little bit of that, let me just say it's worth noting that Abraham and his subsequent successors, including Isaac and Jacob and later Moses, they were not monotheists in the sense we mean it today. They are perhaps best described as henotheists. You see, when we say someone is a monotheist today, we are saying that that person believes in only one God and worships only one God, and that the God that they worship and believe in, they believe to be the only God that exists. For a henotheist, on the other hand, they would believe that multiple gods, at least more than 2, exist, but that they worship exclusively only one of those deities as their patron god. Added to this portrait, historians have long pointed to a discernible lack of continuity concerning God's identity in the earliest narrative traditions. They hint at a sort of proto-monotheism that is itself henotheism, as I said, involving the worship of El Shaddai, the Canaanite high god, prior to Moses meeting Yahweh for the first time as the burning bush. Yahweh even speaks to this discrepancy when introducing himself to Moses, when he is made to say by the writer, I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name Yahweh I did not make myself known to them. In essence saying, I've always been Yahweh. I appeared, though, as El Shaddai, but I want you to call me Yahweh now. Trying to in some way say that these 2 gods are one and the same. Another text in the Bible where this is not sort of the effort, which that's not too neat, the effort to sort of neatly give a justification for why the early Israelites were worshiping El Shaddai, the high god of Canaan, rather than Yahweh, who seems at that point to not be a god of Cana. It was just sort of, that there was two gods being worshipped. Well, here we go. Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9 says, "When El, the Most High, gave the nations their inheritance, and El separated humanity, El fixed the boundaries of the peoples." In other words, El divided people by where they would live and their ethnicity, according to the number of the sons of El. So here El is the Most High and is the king of the gods, the father of all of the other gods, the children of El, the sons of El. And El has a court, and all of those gods that sit on El's court as El's children eventually get sent out to become patron deities of the various regions that El separates the world into over the various human populations that El separates humanity into. And so it says, going on, for Yahweh's portion, and Yahweh here is a son of El, Yahweh's portion of people, El allotted the sons of Jacob, or the children of Israel, another way to translate that, to be Yahweh's heritage, so that Yahweh is the patron deity of Israel, exclusively. So, at some point in Judaism's evolution towards monotheism, the cultic worship of the patron god Yahweh ultimately absorbed and assimilated both the imagery and epithets once used exclusively for the high god El. So that at some point along the way, there was the worship of El and the worship of Yahweh, and that eventually the worship of El waned for some reason, and Yahweh became the exclusive god to be worshipped, not only in a patronage way, but in general. So, moving on, the Exodus story is the most important story in the Jewish narrative tradition. It's an epic, a national saga. It's designed to help the Israelites create a distinctive national and religious identity. And it was never intended to be read as history in our sense of the word. It reflects the conditions of the 7th century, when most of the texts were written and compiled, rather than the 13th century. And so it is, most scholars agree, that many, if not all of the first Israelites, were not foreigners to Canaan, but indeed were Canaanites themselves, some of whom migrated from the southern highlands, and some of whom dispersed from the then failing coastal city-states around Egypt, as Egypt failed. So this collection of communities united to form a new, unified identity under the patronage of the one God, Yahweh. As these two communities come together, they bring together multiple ethnicities and at least two different religious communities: the worshippers of El, the Elohimists, and the worshippers of Yahweh, the Yahwists. They must have concluded that they could gain more from cooperation, even consolidation, than they could through competition and conflict. Indeed, the move from multiple polytheistic or henotheistic tribal communities into one monotheistic nation is the story of Judaism's origins. So, hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our one and only God. This is Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, and it's known as the Shema. It is the quintessential sort of declaration or proclamation or creed, if you will, of the newly emerging monotheistic tradition that is Judaism. Notice here still we don't have an ideal or an exclusive monotheism yet, though. Let me reread it. Hear, O Israel, just speaking to Israel, Yahweh, now we're going to identify our God exclusively as Yahweh, as our patron, is our one and only God. It doesn't say that Yahweh is the one and only God, but rather that Yahweh is Israel's one and only God. So added to this, the temple destruction of the 6th century BCE and the 1st century CE created the conditions for something known as Rabbinic Judaism. With each temple destruction and subsequent exile, the Jewish tradition was forced to evolve. You see, Jews had to decide once their temple, the primary tool or means by which they were called to worship Yahweh, was destroyed, and then the place where Yahweh was worshipped in Israel was taken away from them, and they were moved somewhere else, and had to face the question: do we worship Yahweh still, even though we no longer have the means to do so, and we're no longer in the place where Yahweh is worshipped, or do we worship the patron gods of our captors? And ultimately, Judaism decides that they want to stick with Yahweh. Even though Yahweh was their patron god, Yahweh ultimately it has to evolve himself to become a god that is beyond strictly being patroned. So, Judaism has to evolve. Eventually, Judaism came to understand Yahweh as a universal God who could be worshipped anywhere and apart from the temple cult. So that by Jesus' time, Judaism was becoming a religion of the book rather than the temple, a religion of teachers, of rabbis, rather than a religion of priests. So that Judaism learns how to be more mobile. It learns how to be more, light on its feet, basically, and less attached to a temple and more attached to the story. So it was so key to try and get the story right. So each tradition comes to identify a unique problem with the world and humanity. And for Judaism, the problem is exile. We are separated from God and separated from ourselves. And this comes as the result of idolatry and obscuring the divine image within. Humans are divided between two opposing instinctive drives. The Yetzer Hatav, the good inclination, is the innate drive for all creative and constructive action, moral concern for justice, love, compassion, and righteousness. It's our better angels, if you will. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is by contrast the innate drive for selfishness, the competitive instinct, greed, lust, and the temptation to succeed at any cost, and to harm or cheat anyone to make sure that one succeeds. So, what's the solution? The solution for Judaism is to live like God's chosen people. This is important. And in so doing, they need to study the Torah, to tell the story, remember the exile, and to uphold God's covenant and keep God's commandments, the Torah. This will set an example for the rest of the world. You alone have I singled out of all the families of the earth. That is why I call you to account for all your iniquities, says Amos 33:2. As the chosen people, Jews are called to be a light to the nations, says Isaiah 42:6. And by doing good in the world through Gemilut Hasidim, acts of loving kindness, for Tekum Olam, repairing the world. That in doing these acts, they take part and they participate and they cooperate with God in repairing the world. So the ultimate goal is repair of the world. Whereas other traditions may have an otherworldly heaven or a paradise or something else to look forward to, Judaism really strictly focuses on repairing the here and now. So what does Judaism tell us about humanity? Well, one is believed to become fully human when they have mastered the balance between the Yetzer Hatav, the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. So that Judaism wants to say that we have better angels and not so good angels, and that this is a balancing act, and that neither one needs to be eradicated, but that the complete human has both of these and uses them as tools to make the world a better place and to repair the world. So that once these two contrasting, being selfish and being other-centered, comes together, once one learns how to effectively determine the ways to function in the world between these two different inclinations, once one has mastered this, one is fully human.